Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Candice Bennett. She is the Director of Development and Communications for Good Shepherd Housing. Good Shepherd Housing has been operating here in the Northern Virginia area for a very long time, and if it's not an organization with which you are familiar, Candice is here to talk with us about the history of Good Shepherd Housing, who they serve, the footprint where they provide services, and also she'll tell us how we can all get involved in helping to support the work of Good Shepherd Housing. So welcome, Candice Bennett, to Your Need to Know.
Thanks, Catherine. It's nice to be here. Good Shepherd Housing has been around since 1974. We are operating on the Richmond Highway corridor in Fairfax County. We got started because there were several families who were parishioners at Good Shepherd Catholic Church back in the day who identified a family who had immigrated from Vietnam and was a fairly large family, but they were living in a very, very small house. I think it was only 1 or 2 bedrooms, and I believe they had about 7 children, maybe 8 children. It was a large family. And so these parishioners identified a significant need for this family, and they actually got together and built them a house in Mount Vernon back in 1974, and that was the origination of Good Shepherd Housing. Believe it or not, that house still stands in Mount Vernon, and the family that lived in that house is actually still part of the community. One of the children actually became a doctor, and I know one of the children is still very active in Good Shepherd Catholic Church. So the benefit of stable housing, just like it is today, back then it was, your children have a chance to stay in one school, get to develop the peer networks that they need to be successful, and have a chance to really succeed. And obviously with this family, that was the case. So that was our origin story, and we've had several, obviously, growth spurts over the years. We are now an independent 501c3. We still have strong partnerships with actually not just Good Shepherd Catholic Church, but many of the faith communities in our area. And we're happy to partner with them. And let's see. So what were the questions, Catherine, you wanted me to go into? There was a lot there.
Well, I just want to unpack this a little bit about the people who have come into the Northern Virginia area. It was very interesting. The city of Fairfax had a special meeting about the diversity of Fairfax City, too. And Tom Gelton, who wrote the book, A Nation of Nations, and talked about the change in immigration policy in the 1980s that brought a lot of immigrants into this country, but particularly into the Northern Virginia, D.C. area from countries like Vietnam or Korea and countries in Central America. And so we have a very diverse population here in Northern Virginia, and the Route 1 corridor particularly, and a lot of that has to do with people congregating in communities that are familiar to them, culturally, language-wise, but also it's the affordable housing. People move where they can afford to live. And so the Route 1 corridor has always had a lot of challenges, but faith communities seem to be the one sort of, the organizations that reach out to embrace refugees and immigrants and people new to our communities are faith communities. And I have seen more and more as time has gone on, because, 1974, this is decades ago now. It's over 40 years ago. And the housing hasn't changed. The number of immigrants coming into our community, the diversity of immigrants coming into our community has not changed. It's gotten bigger. And so the need has gotten bigger. And so the fact that you at Good Shepherd Housing have been chipping away at this for such a long time, how have you seen the organization evolve to meet the changing needs, the increased needs? And as far as your advocacy and where you see yourself fitting into the larger redevelopment plans that the county has for the Route 1 corridor?
Well, certainly. So obviously, the communities that we serve both, I would say about 80% of our population is African American or Black. Not all of them, quite a few of them are actually also immigrants from Africa. So it is diverse, but we definitely serve a majority of people of color. And Richmond Highway Corridor is, as you said, it's a very diverse area. How we've changed over the years, for quite a few years, our model was to lease apartments and then sublease them out to folks. We're basically the security in that rental agreement. But we started in early 2000s, we really started to work on actually acquiring housing. And so now we are a landlord. We actually own over 77 units of basically condominiums that we are able to rent out into the community. And how we're able to acquire them through HUD grants means that we're able to actually rent them out at a far more affordable rates than a private investor certainly could, because we are tax exempt. And that's not necessarily automatic for a nonprofit for property tax, but we are property tax exempt. So that is one major expense that could go into someone's rent, right? That does get passed on. So our rents are generally $400 to $500 less than market rate along the corridor. So even though Richmond Highway is generally less expensive than other parts of the county, it's still the cost of living has dramatically increased in the past 20 years, right? I don't think people necessarily always fully appreciate and acknowledge that $1,700 to $1,800 for an average apartment on Richmond Highway Corridor for an older unit is not necessarily affordable for someone who makes $40,000 a year, right? So you generally actually have to make about $60,000 to $70,000 a year to afford an apartment at market rate, even along the corridor. And so for folks that may be working in the hospitality industry, they may be working as a registration clerk at our local hospital. These are not jobs that the salaries are at higher rates. And so consequently, you have a lot of families, sometimes even college educated or with advanced degrees, individuals who are working and an important part of our society who just cannot find suitable housing for them and their families. And so we're able to kind of step in. We are a landlord in that way. But we do have additional programs that we offer our clients, as well as individuals in the community. So I think one program that many people may be aware of is we do provide emergency financial assistance. And that's been obviously a huge component this past year, as you can imagine, as everything shut down, right? March 2020 with the pandemic, and people who had very stable jobs, stable hours, and even in industries that you wouldn't think would be at risk of unemployment, and people were out of work, with just no notice. It was a tremendous shutdown here locally. So in the beginning of the pandemic, actually, we raised money for our emergency services program so that we could help individuals in the community, as well as our own clients who, again, stably employed, but they still had significant needs that they needed to meet. But we were also lucky to be one of the handful of nonprofits in Fairfax County that helped work with Fairfax County to distribute CARES funds. So we actually distributed over $850,000 from about April of last year to December, and helped about 350 families. I think about an average of about $2,400 per grant. And so that was funds that went to paying rent. It went for utility assistance. It went for mortgages. It went for homeowners fees. It was strictly for keeping people in their homes. So emergency services is a program we've had for many years. Obviously, it was then a very big program last year for us. And we're still very much focused on using that in the community right now, because obviously we haven't gotten back to normal yet. Hopefully soon. I keep hoping one day, as I mentioned to the post office gentleman earlier today, was excited. Every day is a good day because we are one day closer to normal.
It's true. And one of the things too the CARES funding was essential for our area particularly, and a number of nonprofits got part of that CARES money to keep people stabilized in their homes. Having legislation passed that prevented evictions was really important, because evicting people in the middle of a pandemic is also a public health crisis. So that was something to look at. Recently in Virginia, they've raised the minimum wage, which became effective just last week, to $9.50 an hour, with the idea of raising the wage eventually to $15 an hour. But as you pointed out, in this area, that's not, working 40 hours a week at $9.50 an hour is not going to keep you in any kind of housing up here. And that's just the reality.
No, you actually, I think with the math, I know with the minimum wage prior to the increase, you could not work every hour of a week and actually have housing and food. Forget everything else. So you just, it's just not manageable.
No, I mean, we really, the discussion we need to be having is around a living wage. And there is a lot of discussion too about the many different ways in which we can provide affordable housing too. It's interesting that, that you have discovered that condos are a great way to provide housing. And I'm interested to know sort of if NIMBYism in any way plays out when you look to acquire properties in certain buildings. I know a lot of nonprofits, acquire properties, and it's a family that lives there. So everybody else living in the building, they're just neighbors, because trying to get projects built, not just individual condos in an existing part, trying to get high density housing has become a fight of its own here in Northern Virginia, particularly.
And it will remain so, probably. It's just something that we have to continue to overcome. I think we have less NIMBYism as we're buying individual units throughout the area. Certainly there's one community that we have a significant number of our units, but we've actually used that as a way to help improve the community. We're actively working in that community to bring events, to bring neighbors together so they get to know each other. They can actually build on trust, because that's how communities can break down, right? They don't have a way of getting to know one another. So that's actually been a focus for us, is not just coming in and buying a unit and then renting it out to a family, but also being a good neighbor to the whole entire community, because it just uplifts everybody if that is a safe and good place to live.
I love that model. And this is the first time I've heard somebody talk about providing affordable housing as part of community building. When we come back from our break, I want to talk a little bit more about that and some of the other initiatives that you are spearheading here in Northern Virginia. So please join us after the break.
Oh, it's on. Release the meteor! Whoa!
He's looking at you, kid.
I dig it.
That felt pretty great.
Hey, Sanjay.
Hey, Rosie, good to see you. What's going on?
So I'm gonna hit you up for some medical advice, if that's okay, that I use you a little bit here.
Yeah, of course, use me.
Okay, say someone already had COVID, right?
That person would still need to get the vaccine.
Okay, Sanjay, you're like really scary right now. You're like a mind reader, but yeah, that was my question.
Even if you've already had COVID, you still need to get vaccinated. And Rosie, keep wearing a mask.
Always. Thanks, Sanjay. You're the best.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we're talking with Candice Bennett. She is the Director of Development and Communications for Good Shepherd Housing, which is located here in Northern Virginia and has been serving the needs of the Mount Vernon Route 1 corridor for over 40 years. Thank you so much, Candice, for being here and explaining a little bit more about your organization for people who may not have heard of Good Shepherd Housing up to this point. We went to break. You were talking about creating communities in the places where you are the landlord and the importance of centering the voices of your tenants and helping them to create communities where they have a connection, where they want to raise a family. And I think that's so important. I think we're having more and more conversations, just not just around affordability, but communities where everyone thrives. You know, there's something called social determinants of health. And, you know, making sure that people live in communities that are environmentally safe and, you know, free of violence and have good public transportation and good schools and where, you know, families can thrive and their children have a real opportunity. So, you know, tell us a little bit more about some of the programs that you've put together. And I know COVID-19 upended everything for so many organizations, but it looks like we're coming out of that. And I see a light at the end of the tunnel. So tell us what happens next for Good Shepherd Housing.
Probably, you know, some of the same things that we were doing before the pandemic, but I think there were a few things that we adopted during the pandemic that will probably continue. One of the things, so one of our programs that we spend a lot of time around is we have a children's resources program that is designed to provide financial support to the families who live in our housing and their children, so that whatever their children might need and the way of extra support, whether it's funding to go on a field trip, it's funding for an extracurricular activity, it's tutoring, it's getting that backpack that's filled with school supplies at the beginning of the year, it's, you know, a winter coat, whatever those might be. The Children's Resources Program is kind of there to fill that gap. And one of the things I really like about it is that it's not one size fits all. Every child has different dreams and different ideas of the things that they need. And so, you know, we don't come in and say, okay, kiddos, these are the only things that you can get out of this program. We had a young woman 4 or 5 years ago. She was really interested in STEM, and she had the opportunity to actually go and travel to I think it may have been Space Camp, but it was out of state, and it was one of those really cool summer programs where she got to, explore the airplanes. And again, I think it may have been Space Camp, but she had a tremendous experience, and we helped partially fund that experience. She also got a scholarship, and so we kind of bridged that gap. But not all children are interested in STEM. I mean, obviously, we certainly all want them to be, but that doesn't mean that they are. So we help support summer camps that may be for fishing or for cheerleading, whatever those may be. We definitely like to come in and make sure that they have those opportunities. So obviously, the past year has upended families everywhere. Certainly every family was impacted by school shutting down, no access really to summer camps. Everything was just different. One of the things that we actually pivoted around is that certainly, as we all were very much concerned about learning loss with the change to a virtual experience. And I applaud Fairfax County for really trying to work hard to make sure that every student had access to the technology they needed to get online during this. And for a school system as large as Fairfax County, that is not an easy feat. I mean, we have almost 200,000 students. And imagining basically, they thought they were shutting down for a teacher work day, and the next thing you know, these kids never went back to school. And so trying to figure out the technology. So obviously it was rough for everybody, but if you can imagine on top of that being a family who the parent, one of the parents, maybe both of the parents lost their job because they were in hospitality or maybe there were other care issues that happen, and so hours are shut down. On top of that, you've got these additional stresses that were happening for these children. So obviously, one of the things we support is tutoring, and we had gotten a grant from one of our fellow organizations here in Northern Virginia that is a grant-making organization. And we went back to them and told them we weren't able to use the grant for the tutoring programs exactly how we'd originally started it out to be. And they worked with us and we pivoted. So we actually funded Wyzant tutoring. So Wyzant is a platform online for parents and students to go find tutors. Well, again, a lot of the times these tutors are in person, but Wyzant also has an online tutoring platform as well. And so we were actually able to utilize that for quite a few of our students who needed it to kind of stay at grade level during this time. And so I have a feeling that we will continue to use that as an additional offering as part of our Children's Resources Program. So one way that we learned to, it was important during the pandemic, but I think we'll be able to use it, coming out of the pandemic. And virtual learning isn't going to fully go away. We're just going to use it differently, I think.
Well, I think you hit on something really important, and that is resources for children, because so often the gap, the achievement gap, widens as kids go through elementary school, precisely because they have the summers off. And whereas kids from more affluent families that have resources, they can go to space camp or cheerleading camp or sleepaway camp, and the rest of kids whose parents work might sit at home all day behind a locked door and not have any enrichment activities. But it's interesting that the first family that you helped, you mentioned that one of the kids became a doctor. Given the right environment, the right resources, the right supports, kids can do anything. All children can be and do anything if they have the right supports and the right resources. And so I think this is so important that Good Shepherd Housing has identified the fact that part of a healthy, thriving family and healthy, safe communities is really pouring resources into giving kids these things that there's a lot of our viewers probably never thought about, the fact that their children, my own children, had opportunities to do extracurricular enrichment activities after school and in the summertime. So I'm hoping for your sake that the summer really does open up and you're able to offer these opportunities.
Well, it sounds like they are. I believe our Children's Resources Manager, I believe she's actually already started to reach out to our families about some of the summer camps that are being offered this summer. So it looks very promising, and I'm excited about it. And there's plenty of opportunities out there. So it should be a good summer.
Well, that's fantastic. And as far as your footprint, it's its own sort of organizational feat to own and maintain 77 properties and to be a landlord, in addition to all of the other support services that you're trying to provide. So, is part of your future goal is to keep expanding the number of properties that you own so that you can support more families in the Route 1 corridor? Absolutely.
We try to acquire anywhere from 3 to 5 units per year so that we can continue to grow the families that we can support. We still also actually sublease units out to families. So part of the challenge that we find, obviously there are families whose income is that 30 to 50% area median income. So for someone who's listening, that here in Fairfax County, that could be $40,000 to even $60,000 a year is that 30 to 50% AMI. Obviously, growing up, I never thought we would think that $60,000 would be low income. But here in Northern Virginia, with an average median income of $126,000 roughly for a family of 4, $60,000 is a low income. And so consequently, obviously, there is a stretch of housing that's out of reach for them. There's another segment of the population that makes more than $60,000. They, sometimes we qualify them as workforce housing as a segment, but sometimes they're also struggling to get out of housing because they may have marks against their credit. Credit history has become a major obstacle for families being in housing, whether it's just, quite frankly, one late bill can be a bad mark, but, for God forbid you get actually evicted and that goes on your record, that can keep you out of housing. That can actually permanently make you homeless. It's a major obstacle. So we're able to step in for those families who do have a job. There's a lot of reasons why people may have issues with their credit. Medical debt is a big problem for many families. It does not take much to be pushed over the edge when it comes to some of these things. So consequently, in those cases, they're able to afford some of these higher rate, more market rate apartments, but they might not get in on their own name. And so they basically need a co-signer. And we kind of come in and we're able to actually secure that risk and help them get back on their feet. Whether, and however long it takes, for a couple of years for them before they're able to actually go back out and then secure an apartment in their own name.
That is super important. And again, I've never heard of a program like that, but I think it's fantastic. For our viewers, in the last couple of minutes that we have, how can people get involved? They can go to your website and they can certainly see the programs, but is there a role for volunteers to play with Good Shepherd Housing?
There is. Obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of volunteer opportunities were non-existent, but we have opportunities every once in a while where it may be turning over an apartment. And sometimes we have opportunities for slightly larger groups. Sometimes we've had some opportunities. So one of the communities where we have a significant number of our units, we've had groups come in and do landscaping, or they've built benches. So there's opportunities like that. There's also opportunities. We'll have trunk or treat this fall come back. We were very sad that we were not able to do trunk or treat last October, but we're excited. It's coming back in this coming October. I'm sure it will look a little different with the pandemic kind of still normalizing things out. So there'll be opportunities if folks want to help give out candy and help us do a community building activity. That would be certainly welcome. And then we always are looking periodically to do things, especially during the summer, where we're trying to collect school supplies and backpacks, and then winter coats potentially in this winter, although we do work with a lot of partners in the community to supplement that.
So I'm going to tell people they need to go to goodhousing.org to check it all out. Thank you so much, Candice, for being here. And this is what you need to know.